thank you very much for doing what you're doing for not just red tag, but for the fly fishing community in Victoria and beyond. So over to you, mate.
Thanks a lot, Barney. Yeah, really appreciate it. And I'd like to firstly thank all the members of Red Tag, then also David, who asked me to do this presentation. And I also want to thank Sean as well, Alert, for the previous presentation, because I didn't thank him for asking me to do that one. So thank you very much. And yeah, welcome everyone else who's jumped on board tonight. We're going to run through early river season fishing. And this was meant to be timed so all you guys would be out of lockdown, excited, pumped, and you'd see this presentation and go, awesome, now I know what to do. But unfortunately, most of you guys are locked down for a period. I understand some regional people won't be. But we're all with you together, and I'm just letting you know that most people in regional areas are sort of following suit with you Melbourne guys, and we're all sort of restricting ourselves from, moving around. So stick with it, and it won't be long until you're all out in the water. So just a little bit about myself. Everyone from Red Tag knows who I am, but for people that don't, my name is Scott, and I run a full-time guide operation called Wilderness Fly Fishing. I've been a full-time guide now for 6 seasons now, 6 years, yeah. And I'm also a part owner in a private lake system called Millbrook Lakes, just towards Ballarat, which is a great little spot there. Most people would have visited that spot over the last 20 odd years. But you're all on here to learn about how to catch more fish, especially in early river season when it's quite high. So let's talk about what we might encounter when we head out, particularly early river season, okay? And that's all good. Is it David there? Everyone can see that. We're moving along around. Yep.
Yeah, that's good.
Thumbs up. Good. So it's let's talk about what we will encounter, which will be high water. Generally, we're going to fish high water early season. So we're all pumped. We've been sitting around all winter tying flies. We can't wait to get out on the water, and we hit our favourite river, and it's just pumping. Generally, it's through snow melt or rain over the winter period. So we'll be talking about high water. First of all, we'll tick off fish behaviour, because we have to understand what the fish are doing this time of year. And then methods, we'll run through the best methods that we're going to use to catch the fish. Then we'll go through my little favourite bit, which is flies, and also where to fish. And usually, like last presentation, I'll tell you, I'll use maps of lakes like last time we did, or whatever for midge. But this is less about that, because just about most streams up northeast Victoria, where this is going to be focused in on, contain fish, contain good numbers of fish. So it's more about where to fish in each river system, because they're all very similar. Okay, let's look at fish behaviour early season. So we're heading out to the water. Like I said, we hit the river, it's pumping. So we've got cold water. So that means that the fish's metabolic rate will be lower. Okay, and what this means, I'm not going to go too scientific. When it's a lot colder, they eat less. I guess they're almost hibernating in a way. Okay, and generally the water temp will be lower than 12 degrees, so they won't have to eat as much. Ideal water temperature for fish growing and fish eating is about 14 to 17 degrees. But we're all out there. We're not going to sit around at home. We are now because we're in lockdown, but we're not going to sit at home and wait for the water temperature to warm up. We're going to hit it while it's cold, because the fish are still there. Okay. In the high flows, particularly over winter, the fish are lying and searching for cover out of those high flows. They're a bit like me, a little bit lazy, so they want to stick out of those high currents. There's not a lot of food coming down. Okay. Most fish early season will feed subsurface, less on top, but not always. We'll go through that. They're less likely to move to eat food. Okay, so that comes back to that metabolic rate. So as the water temperature increases, they will swing and move big time to eat food. But this time of year, not a lot of food. They're conserving energy. So they're going to sit behind that rock and not move a lot. And that'll lead into something later about how we fish for the fish. They're more likely to be in shallow water, not always, but shallow water will warm quicker than deeper water, okay? So those little bends and corners where it's riffly and shallow, particularly open areas where the sun hits these areas, excellent spots. Okay, and fish are more happy to congregate together this time of year to get out of those flows. So you will find areas where you'll find good numbers of fish in small areas. Okay, let's talk about where we're fishing early season. We're going to encounter high water. That photo in the background, that was actually summertime, previous summer. We had really high flows all summer. So I guess this discussion could lead into just high water as well. So what to do if you're fishing high water. Okay, the best methods when fishing early season is indicator nymphing, European nymphing, nymph under dry, and swinging flies. Okay, let's talk a little bit about indicator nymphing. One of my favourite methods to march up a river early season, and most people that have been out with me would have done a little bit of indicator nymphing, which will lead into the setup just now. So what we mean by indicator nymph fishing is a bit of wool yarn and then your nymph. It did say double nymph setup, but you don't always have to use a 2 nymph setup. Okay, generally I'll go with a single fly, and then attach the second fly. So when indicator nymphing, 5 or 6 weight rod. I do like a slightly heavier rod when using this method. It's just easy to cast, easy to maintain. But if you want to go with your 4 weight, that's fine if you can manage it. Just a weight forward floating fly line, a 9-foot 4X leader, and tippet there. We're going to run 5X thin diameter tippet, and we're going to harp on a bit about this discussion because it's really key when fishing early season is to go really light on your tippet and your droppers there. So we've got that indicator there. I like to use a wool yarn indicator, something like a New Zealand strike indicator there, to your 9-foot 4X leader. And then I like to run a section of as fine tippet as possible. I reckon 5X tippet's just perfect, or in the old scale 4 pound. The lighter you go, the better for nymph fishing, okay? It's not because fish see line. I don't know, that's debatable. I've taken photographs of fine fluorocarbon underwater, and I've seen it flashing around a bright sunny day, which they say that light doesn't travel down it, but it's debatable, okay? But what's key to in this type of fishing is using 5X tippet. I'm just going to turn my phone off because it's dinging. 5X tippet, fine tippet below that wool indicator, so it cuts the water quicker. Because we may be using, we'll talk about the nymphs there, we may be using, and we always use tungsten nymphs, I'll get to that, but we're always using fine tippet because there's no point in using tungsten nymphs if we've got heavy tippet, because the tippet will hold up the flies from getting down to the bottom where most fish will be feeding this time of year, close to the bottom. Okay, so we've got the 5X tippet there. People will say, what length do I run under the indicator? Well, I don't know. The river's not a square rectangular shape. It's deeper in some sections. It's shallow in some sections. What's important is that the weight of the nymph is changed regularly. And that's one thing I don't see a lot of people changing their flies a lot. Not the pattern, not too concerned about the pattern early season. I'm really concerned about the weight of those nymphs, okay? And it is a great way, if they're feeding this time of year, they're generally feeding on small nymphs, size 16s. And that's why it's a great way to fish and hang that little fly down, a 16 down deep. So you can tie something like a size 12 on the top there, heavy tungsten, and then off the back, trail your little size 16, and you'll find that the smaller fly gets eaten a lot there. A little bit more on indicated nymph fishing. So I've harped on about using a light tippet, and we know now that's to deliver the flies down quickly to the bottom during your drift. Use a bright indicator, like a New Zealand strike indicator, that can be moved around, slid up and down the line, okay? Keep the flies close together. So if you do use that 2 flies under your indicator, 2 nymphs, make sure they're around 25 centimetres, quite close, okay? I see a lot of people hanging at about 50 centimetres. The reason for that, we don't want the flies to argue with each other. And what that means, if one of your nymphs, let's say it's 50 centimetres below that top nymph, kicks out slightly to the left, it's in a different current to that fly on the top. So what that causes is drag. So that bottom fly drags the top fly or vice versa. So we want them close together in a straight line, following each other very close, okay? The longer drifts with indicated nymph fishing allows your flies to work deeper. So it is a great option in slightly larger rivers, Rubicon and bigger, great for tailwater fishing. Tend to lean towards this type of fishing more than European nymphing, just because we can cast out long 40, 50 feet and drift the flies and keep the flies down towards the bottom for longer. Like I said, it's a great way to deliver small flies. And also when using this method, I know there's always casting people in clubs, but learn how to use the Belgian cast, okay? Which is, if you've saltwater fly fish, it's the same one. If you've got an indicator with 2 flies, it can get a bit messy sometimes. So open up your loops, nice wide loops, and throw them to the sky, okay? Which is that Belgian style cast. And then cast like that all the time because it's one of the better casts you can learn. Keep those loops nice and open and you won't be entangled. So that's a little bit there. So let's go into, this is, it is the best way to fish nymphs, okay? There's no doubt about that. It's proven in competition angling. And that's European nymphing, short line nymphing. It's got a few names, but we just call it European nymphing. It will put the flies where the fish need to be, and it sort of emphasised on that last indicator fishing where we're throwing the nymphs up, but now we're keeping in contact. So a lot of the fish, the early season, just going to nip at your flies really quickly. If you're indicated nymph fishing, the nymphs are sort of rolling around. You don't know what's going on below that indicator. You're waiting for them to almost pull that indicator down. But with European nymphing, we're in contact with those flies the whole time. They put the fly in the mouth, you feel it, you strike. So your catch rate will increase as well with this type of fishing. Well, this is a bit full on. We could have done a discussion just on this thing here, but I'm not going to harp it because we could talk about this in a full discussion. But if the red tag's done I think 1 or 2 or 3 maybe, nymphing days out with me.
Can they see me?
Can hear someone. So we've got. So I'm just going to show you tell you about the quick setup here. But I would highly recommend, if you can get out on a European nymphing day, it's the best way to learn this whole setup because there's no point in getting all this and not knowing how to use it all. Okay. So we're running generally in our streams 10-foot 2 or 3 weight rods. We want a good disc drag reel, a European nymphing line, and then from that fly line we attach 9 foot of 3x indicator tippet, roughly the same, a rod length of that indicator tippet. Then we have a 50 centimetre break in that leader construction there of 50 centimetres of clear of 3x. And then we attach another bit of indicator material, another 50 centimetres to a tippet ring. Okay, that little break in the line just helps visually see what the line is doing and what the flies are doing. Off that 2 mil tippet ring, we've got 60 centimetres of 5x fluorocarbon, and our top dropper, 20 centimetres or less. Like I said, keep them short if you can, less arguing with the flies off that dropper, and then 50 centimetres. So we can vary that depending on the river we're fishing, but this method allows us to fish a lot of varied water, generally from about, I guess, belly deep down with that setup there. So it covers most of your northeast streams, fishing that setup. Slightly deeper, you can extend your tippet sections there. Generally, the point fly is heavier than the top fly, but people say you can use a heavy one on the top and the lighter one on the point. I do like to keep them close together. Okay, so that's our setup there. Again, it's very similar as with any type of nymphing. Go with super light tippet. Particularly with European nymphing, you start stepping down to 6x tippet and even 7x, super fine, 2 pound tippet. The lighter the line, the quicker the flies cut through the surface of that water and through the layers of the water and get the flies down deep. It's not always 2 flies we use with this. A lot of people assume you're always using 2 flies with this method. I've probably, over the last 2 seasons, been fishing more 1 fly, single fly with this method to prevent that arguing again between the 2 flies. Use bright flies in the dirty water, which we'll go through later. What flies? We pretty much we use the same flies, indicated nymph fishing or European nymphing. Maintain contact with the flies. You'll catch a lot more fish maintaining contact. And also animate your flies, which is moving your flies. A lot of people think that nymphing is just, almost dead drifting to the point, but there's a lot of movement in your flies, so particularly in high water. And like you said, fish your flies close to the bottom. Okay, everyone's probably done this method, I guess, if you've fished a river, the old dry dropper rig. So you've headed to the river and it is just a nice level. Or you've headed upstream and found a nice small water. Dry dropper is a perfect way to deliver your nymphs in shallower water. And there's your dry dropper rig there. For those that haven't fished it before, most would have. We're just running a 4 or 5 weight rod with this, a good disc drag reel, a weight forward floating fly line, same weight as the rod, 5 or 4. A 9-foot 4x leader does the job perfect. Dry fly on the top, just a clinch knot to the bend in the hook there, and straight to your nymph there. Bit of fluorocarbon tippet. I forgot to mention that. I only use fluorocarbon with dry fly fishing and nymphing everything. So if you've got any monofilament, and you've probably heard me before, we'll get it together all one night and we'll burn it together. Okay. Now, a little bit about nymph under dry fishing. There is a little bit to it. And when you start European nymphing, you take more notice of these things. But the nymph should not engage your dry fly throughout the drift. So what that means is you're not really fishing like a bubble float. Your nymph isn't hanging off 90 degrees. You're casting up, your nymph sinking below the dry fly. Throughout that drift, it should never hang at the 90 degrees. It should always be like you're fishing 2 separate flies at the one time, okay? That again will stop that arguing of the fly, because the surface water, the surface water is faster than the water where the rocks are down below, okay? So you can have that, your dry flies on the surface there scooting along real fast. What's happening to your nymph down below? It's dragging, okay? So to prevent that longer dropper length, okay? And again, change the weight of your flies to suit the water, okay? So you can, with this method, a lot of people say, I've got to fish a big dry to hold up my nymph. You don't have to. You can use small light flies and still fish nymphs underneath them, okay? When using the top fly, the dry fly, because you can certainly get dry flights early season opening, no doubt about it, particularly in your smaller water where it's not, the fish don't have to come up a long way to eat. Use dry flies with high vis posts. The water is bumpy this time of year, and you want to be able to react quickly to those takes on the nymph particularly. You can see that big dry fly there. Use large dry flies when blind fishing. It just makes everything easy to see. And smaller dry flies, if you've got fish rising, if you think the fish will come up, generally try and stick with smaller dry flies, okay? Swing flies, I guess some of you guys would have come out on the trip. There's Craig, come up to the snowies or the swampy trip. And if you come out with me, I would have probably got you swinging, okay? One of my favorite methods to fish is swinging flies, and it's a great option early season. And I guess we'll quickly talk about what you need to do that. So it's just a 5-weight 9-foot rod is fine. If you only got a 6-weight, well, you're using a 6-weight, that's fine. 5-weight floating fly line and a 3x leader. So we're going stronger with the leader and tippet when we're using this method, okay? And I guess when I get people swinging, the first thing they think of is I'm swinging a woolly bugger or something big and ugly. Yes, that is the right thing to do, particularly if the water's dirty. But if we encounter clear water, most of the time we're swinging nymphs and pupa, okay? Again, because we're sweeping to the fish, the line is tight or taut. We're having the fish coming up from behind, grabbing those flies. So you can break off a lot of fish doing this, particularly big fish, but even smaller fish. So use stronger tippet. And when swinging, tend to use just a single fly, whether it be a nymph or a pupa. So no two flies with this. If we're swinging big chunks of meat, we are using flies with big fluoro bead heads and that can be seen. Okay. You can use sinking lines with this method as well. If you want to, particularly on the Goulburn, like a die 3 line and swing, if you chuck a meat, it's a good option as well. Okay. Use and fish dark coloured flies in dirty water. That's with your nymphs as well. So fish black flies generally most of the time. Like I said, swing nymphs in the pupa in the clear water. And what I love about swinging, it allows you to fish water that you wouldn't or you couldn't fish upstream fishing, so upstream nymphing or European nymphing. So as you can see, this is Peter, I think, on the Swampy, and we're swinging that far bubble line across there. And that's got overhanging branches, things like that. We just couldn't get upstream cast. But when we walked upstream and swung through there, that's where all the fish were holding. So you can draw fish out of areas where you couldn't use a fish. Great option for riffle water. So that, that fast, riffly stuff that, knee deep. Plenty of fish in that water. It's very hard sometimes, to fish that type of water. Swinging through that water, you cover a lot more water, so you catch a lot more fish out of that type of water. Okay, the cool bit of this discussion, the flies, okay? And I know that some of you guys are going to go, there's only one fly you need, but we won't talk too much about that. So let's get into the flies. This is for you fly ties out there. Unfortunately, I don't tie as much as I used to. I would say if it wasn't on a fly you tied, well, then it's not your fish. But I guess I'm not that much of a wanker these days. So use commercial flies as well, because most of my flies are commercial, or they're tied by Kyle Jones, a mate. All right. I was just going to put this as one category, which is just nymphs, but then that one fly down that bottom right-hand corner came into picture, and I thought, okay, it's just going to be nymphs and squirmy. No, it won't even be another category. So again, if you've been out in the water with me, you would have seen some of these flies fished, particularly in high water. So a lot of jig flies. I particularly like using jig flies even with double nymph rigging, indicator nymph fishing, only because those flies travel with the tip point upside down, so less likely to get stuck on the bottom and go through your fly. So big fan of the old jig head there. We'll start at the top left-hand corner. That's one of my favorites there. Silver beads tend to pop a bit more in the water. So that's the Duracell nymph. It's hard to tell there because I took a photo of this in natural light. It doesn't look really like the fly, but that's like a purple UV color there. Quite blingy. And I do like those. I know it's getting a bit weird, but I do like those soft hackly bits around them. It was particularly CDC, just gives it that little bit of movement through the water. Pink jig tag would have to be one of my go-to flies, particularly in high water there. Again, also the pink beadhead Frenchie, I couldn't fit them all on this page and I didn't want to, but you should have a good arrangement of nymphs with different colored beads, not just gold and brass. Okay. So have purple beads, have blue beads, it doesn't really matter. Just make sure you got a range of different colored flies, particularly in pressured water, places like the Stevenson, Rubicon. Start fishing different colored beads there. Okay. Fluoro orange beadhead, that pops as well. UV check nymph, great for your top dropper there. That's the Simon's ugly there in the brown, even though it's sort of like a red color. Some people may be colorblind, but that's would be one of my, if you fish in the Swampy, you've probably seen me tie that on. That Simon's ugly brown. It's actually got 2 tungsten bead heads tied into that fly. So it's a big bomb-like fly, but the fish just love that fly. They eat that a lot. But double nymph rigging in tail waters and then hanging a little caddis pupa off the back, a caddis fly off the back of that, or even a hare's ear nymph, or even any of those other flies if it's dirty. It's a great one for that. The check weapon's been my favorite now for probably 4 seasons now. It's pretty self-explanatory. You can see you can sort of have a look at that page that you're looking at there and see all those flies popping. So it's more about being seen. You know, this water's flowing fast. These fish have to make a quick decision. What's going to be seen easier? Is it a hairsier nymph? You know, that's a black bead? Probably not. So you don't have to go as natural with your colours. It's just, if it gets seen, remember, fish don't have hands. They feel with their mouth. They put it in the mouth. That's all we have to do. Okay, so get the fish to put it in the mouth. Again, if you notice as well, like that pink head Frenchie or the Frenchie that's down there, slim profile. Again, why? It's simple. It cuts the water quicker. Try not to use bulky nymphs, okay? There's no point in putting 5X and 6X tippet on and having bulky flies because they don't cut the water as quickly, okay? And look at that filthy fly there. They should ban that, the squirmy worm, okay? And like you said, it's all about, like I said, about being seen. And which one do you think can be seen out of all those flies? It's a pink thing with a wiggly tail, okay? And a bright pink bead. It just gets seen. It gets seen more than any other fly. So, and it was banned in competition fishing. So thank you, competition anglers. They gave it to us. We've got it. Now they don't.
How would you hook the fish if you had that big long tail?
The big long tail, they'll eat the hook as well, mate. They'll get real hungry. But we'll go to questions later. What you can do is you can write all your questions in, and then at the end of the presentation, I'll answer all your questions. And I'll be like Dan Andrews. I won't leave until everyone has left, okay, or stopped asking me questions until I'm sitting by myself with my rum and Coke. All right. This presentation will be put on YouTube, so I think, and I'll ask, David's giving me the thumbs up, so I'll spread the love with these flies and all that. It'll be on YouTube, so and I'll put a link on my socials and whatever, so you can come back and pause this and have a look. I get, as you know, I've worked at the fly fishery in Melbourne, so I grab all my flies, which are all these from the fly fisher. So if you're not tying yourself, they're all there. Dry flies, as we say, nymphs are for wimps, dry or die, hey. So these are my go-to flies early season. Keep it really simple. Some high-vis patterns there on the left, and then some stuff that if they're eating off the top, it's generally going to be smaller. So generally, if I'm going nymph under dry, it's a Swisher's PMX there with the high-vis post. It's tied with that nice hackle going sideways like a parachute post, so it rides perfectly. It doesn't roll as much as other flies. That's, as you know, we've done fishing just about everywhere. You've probably caught a fish on that Scott's high-vis paradun if you've been out with me, whether it be the lakes or up in the swampy. And then the high-vis clink hammer as well. So something a little bit smaller. So if I'm thinking, I think there's a real good chance of a fish coming up early season, I'll go with a little clink hammer there with that high-vis post there. Okay, and let's say we do come to a nice little glide, the river's down a bit, and there's a little bit of a hatch happening, smaller flies. So you are looking at size 16 dries generally, and smaller 16, 18s if they're up. That little CDC done, it's perfect. Little CDC emerges and F flies, those sort of smaller flies are the go there. Or a little parachute Adams or something like that if you've got them. All right, the next bunch of flies are my favourite. I put them one of these in here because I thought Sean Alert might be on, and that's that sex dungeon down there. Okay, so you can see what's happening here when you're swinging flies. We've got what we call meat flies, which are just woolly buggers and coneheads and stuff, so big things that can be seen. But if, like I said, if you've been on a tailwater fishing with me in high water, you've most likely swung nymphs with me. So little flashbacks, little hot spots and things like that can get the fish's attention to come up. On the left there, perfect flies. Just like we talked earlier, just single fly. So only time one of those nymphs on when you swing. Hairsier soft tackle, perfect. They have, when you swing those, just small beads. You're not heading down to the bottom with those swinging flies. And like I said, if you've been on the swampy, you've most likely caught a fish as well on the sparkle pupa, which is a caddis pupa. Generally early season, definitely less sparkle pupa around. So swing your nymphs, your mayfly style nymphs. swinging big, dirty chunks of meat. We're looking at orange beadhead, black woolly buggers there. Tend to, when you swing these big flies, you will cut slightly upstream, chuck a mend in, get them to work down a little bit before you grip and let them swing across the surface there. The hotheads straggle there, just a different colour, green, black. The big cone head there with that UV flash through it, so it's got a nice heavy bead. So that's a great one, especially fishing tailwaters like the Goulburn. A great one to hit the far bank, throw a mend in, let it work down a metre or so, and then rip it. And I guess these type of flies down here, which is actually called the sex dungeon, I guess the Americans have got excited over the last few years, particularly with their double hand fishing, spay fishing, which has allowed them to throw bigger flies. But you can still chuck that in a 6-weight, no problem, that fly. And like I said, sometimes just if fish are hungry early season and they're ready and they're aggressive, coming out of that spawn, they're going to eat these big flies here. So that is it for swinging flies, okay? Okay, and this is where I've changed it. Most of my presentation will say, go to the Stevo and fish this section, but I just think that was a bit lame for this presentation, and because all of our rivers are just like, they've all been hot, they've all had good water levels for the last few years. They're all fishing exceptionally well. But it's where to fish in the river. So this is more about where to fish in rivers. So this is where I got the other presentation out of, because this section went for about 30, 40 slides or something. So I pulled it out and I just thought, I'll keep it to high water levels early season. So, okay, let's just break down the river. So this is what's going through my mind when I hit a river. It's like all computing. So, and the first thing I'm thinking about is body position in the river first. There, where am I going to put my body or the client's body in that river to fish the best spot? And early season, most of the fish are going to be in that area called the seam there. Okay, so you got the chute, which is the fast water that breaks out from the tail out of the previous run. So that's that fast water there. In this photo is not good because it is sort of a normal river height. But as if you can imagine this coming up, let's say 2 foot higher, that seam's going to push further out to the right there. So most fish will follow the seam across, even till it's right out on the bank, okay? Because they're trying to avoid fighting that fast current. So your first cast, or your cast, are going to work from the seam, from the shallow part of the seam, okay? If it's high and clear, they will sit in the chute, because most of the time that chute will have boulders and large rocks for the fish to hide behind. And that's when using heavy flies is key when fishing that chute, or 2 flies, okay? Whether it be European nymphing or indicated nymphing or nymph under dry. Then you've got the flat there where where the chute ends and sort of widens out. You've got the nice flat section there. And then we all know that it usually widens out and goes into what's called the tail out, where it shallows out again and then goes into the next run. And there's usually a riffle above there. So that's a quick breakdown of the river, where to fish. So early season, target the seams, like I said, but the inside bends, okay? So this is a really good example here of bend. It's a U-shaped bend here. They don't usually come as good as that, but so straight away, we know this area in high flows, the fish can really hug that left-hand side of the bank there, because in winter that could have been 3 foot high. So that's always going to be a good holding position for fish. And as it drops or clears like that has. So Sonny here is going to make the cast right on the seam, just almost under his rod tip there. And that's where the fishing are high. So fish the inside bends of rivers. Fine clear water, that's pretty self-explanatory. And I find most early season, generally, because we've got a lot of snowmelt, generally they're high and clear, okay? So it's not a bad thing. But if you got dirty water, you got to find clear water, whether that be just the edges or closer in out of the deeper water of a river, or you can head upstream, look for different parts of the rivers. And if you go onto your favorite river and it's just blown out, no good, just move. You might find a new river that will be your new favorite river. So don't always go back to the same river expecting to find what you found last week, okay? Or last season. Fish the middle sections of rivers. We talked about the fish's metabolic rate. So it's a weird thing because they are a cold water species, but this time of year we're looking for warm water. Okay, so fish the middle sections of rivers where they're quite open. The farmland sections of rivers that you've encountered, you've got more sunlight penetrating the water. So generally we'll find as we head down to around the middle sections, they're the best sections because you've got a little bit of increased temperature in the river. And generally if we head down further, they start to become dirty. So they're really good sections of river. And head to the rivers with smaller catchments. So that's pretty self-explanatory. So if you've got big rivers coming off mountains with a lot of snowmelt, avoid those. Start heading to smaller rivers, smaller catchments. Fish the flats in high water. We talked about the breakdown of the river. This was late season, so it's not early season, but same thing. We've headed to our favourite river and it's just blown and dirty, okay? So Kyle, he's just doing some indicator nymph fishing. And he's fishing the flat.
Yeah, boy. Woo!
Just thought I'd put a video in to break it up, really. So,
Ring a ding ding! Here comes the king, hey? Look at that.
so there is. So this is typical where the top of the river here, that shooting seam was just blowing. It was just flowing like a rapid. So we moved to the tail out just there where you can see the fish pulling down. We fished from the tail out to the flat section. All the fish were held up in the flat. So they weren't on the seam because there sort of wasn't any. So they will move out to where there's less current. And they'll feed really heavily here in that dirty water. So have a look at those flats. And this is really key. And you'll see this through particularly competition angling is fish repetitively. So like I said, the fish have got that low metabolic rate. They're not moving a hell of a lot. They're sitting behind that rock. If you put that fly, let's say 20 centimeters to the right of that rock, they're not going to move to eat it. Okay, you have to put that fly in front of the fish's face. So I see a lot of people 3 or 4 casts move up, 3 or 4 casts move up. No, fish repetitively. If you're in a run, a short run in the Stevo should take you half an hour to fish, maybe 45 minutes to fish it thoroughly. Fish that 3D space from top to bottom, but fish repetitively. There's so many rocks that fish could be behind. And keep on hammering away. And then change your flies and make sure you constantly fishing every part of it because the river is a 3D space. There's different depths. Make sure your fly goes through every bit of that space. Fish short, I guess. We take a lot of people out that have, they say, I've been fly fishing for 10 years. And the one thing we pick up that most people do is they like to cast long. I think the American market sold us casting, in that long, beautiful loops and all that. But you've got to learn to cast shorter and can have really good line control. The least amount of line we have in the water, least amount of problems we have. As soon as we start laying out line on the water, we've got different currents pulling and moving the flies, and we're trying to get that dead drift happening, okay? So fish short, and even in summertime, dry fly fishing, fish short, you'll have much better control and you'll be able to detect fish better. And we've learned that through competition angling to fish shorter and shorter. Look for offshoots and feeder streams. So when you head out to your favourite river, it's a little bit blown. You'll find that little offshoots, you can see one to the right there that are coming in. This is a tributary of a bigger river that we headed up on because it was too high, the main river. So look for little offshoots and little feeder streams. And, and then the water's flowing fine here. So we're catching, fish on dry flies early season. Again, big flies. So stick to those offshoots, and that's where your Polaroids come in handy. Okay, early season. All right, fish softer pockets. That's pretty self-explanatory as well. This is like that river that I said that was absolutely pumping. The good thing, some people will see a river that's pumping and just they feel disappointment. I sort of get a bit excited because it becomes predictable where fish will hold. And as you can see, just to the right of her left arm there, I think there was 3 fish in there. The one with the tail of the fish just up there, really close. There was one in there. There was just about a fish in every pocket there. So fish are less, they're more concentrated to areas. So fish those soft pockets and fish them thoroughly, and you'll find most fish that are there are quite aggressive. If you've been out in the water with me, you've heard me harp on about this, that foam is home. So, and that means that's where all the food's coming down, obviously, and hit the hot spot first. I see a lot of people when they're walking up river, they'll present their fly, 50 centimeters or 60 centimeters to the left of where it should have went. So you're giving an opportunity for the fish to see those flies and think about it. Don't give the fish an option to think about it. Okay. And like I said, early season, they're not moving a lot. So if you're delivering it just a bit wide of the hot spot or, a bit too short of the hot spot, you're giving fish time to think. They'll see it. And every time they see it, they go a little bit off. And I guess most guys that have fished New Zealand would have experienced that. They haven't hit that money cast first. It gives the fish some time to cruise to the left and think about it. But if you deliver that fly straight to the fish, you're most likely to eat it. Okay.
Yeah, good to go, mate.
You see Nathan deliver this right towards the hot spot in that foam there. Come on, Nathan, hit it. You can do it. Yeah, good one.
Oh, yes!
So you put it right in that foam line. So concentrate on where the food is.
Good job!
And make repetitive casts again into those hot spots before you move up. And this is the last one I'll go on about. I get a lot of people asked to be guided on tailwaters or large waters. I guess they're a bit intimidated by a larger water, but there's no different. You break them down the same way you would that small river or any other river. But they're a great option. I think last European Nymphing Day we did with red tag, it was May or something. It was, yeah, because Cam got that big 9-pounder on that buddy on the 2-weight rod or something. But we planned to do it on the Stevenson River, small river, and it was just blown chocolate like. So we just, we knew it wasn't a good option. So we headed to the Goulburn, and I think out of the 6 or 7 guys, everyone landed fish and multiple fish. So tailwater is a great option because they're controlled and generally they're lower. So they're a reverse river. They're high in summer and low in the cooler months when the river's open. So you'll find low water, clear water. You can have great hatches, generally clear. So it's a great option to head to the Goulburn this time of year. And of course, they've put those big dirty dogs in from the hatchery. So, you're always a chance of catching a monster as well. But there's heaps, last season, there's heaps of good resident fish in there as well. Most of the larger fish that get caught are caught in early season. So be prepared. You are using 5X tip because, using all that light stuff. Be prepared to you may encounter large fish, okay? It's post-spawn. They may be running up from a main tributary into the smaller water or dropping back. So you can encounter really good fish this time of year, okay? So play them accordingly. You've got light tippet on. That's why a softer tip rod's a good option as well. So you can protect your tippet. Wear good gear, particularly your boots. Like if you don't want to drop a lot of coin on waders, drop it all on your boots, okay? Because it's the thing that stops you from falling in the river. And I guess I put this up more for me because I'm clumsy and I fall in rivers before any client does. So, wear good boots with some good metal studs in them, and and bring a change of clothes because it is the water is cold this time of year, and when I fell in last season, it was fresh. So bring a spare change of clothes. Now I didn't want to put this in, but this pretty much concludes the presentation. I didn't want to put this in to stir up any of you guys because I thought we'd be honestly open and ready to go by now. But we've put together an advanced Dreamcraft course with Craig Coltman and myself on the 7th and 8th of October, just out of Marysville there. And we're pretty much going to work through all these, all what we've discussed tonight, which is European nymphing. We pretty much do a half day on that, 3/4 of a day on that. and then the first day, then we have some fly tying at night, 3 or 4 hours at the pub. And then the next day we move into advanced dry fly fishing, swinging flies, animation, moving flies. And then we have a bit of a casting clinic as well, which is all your bow and arrow cast, rolls, Belgiums, double hauls, everything. We cover it. So, if you are in a regional area, I think we've still got about three spots available at the moment on this course. We've got a maximum of 6 people on this course. And hopefully we may organise something like this, maybe with Red Tag again, if you guys are interested in doing something like this, or a single day or something like that. But if you're interested, feel free to contact me, and particularly if you're not in unfortunately the lockdown area. So, and yeah, thank you very much for watching tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was a short, sweeter presentation, but yeah, hope you learnt a little bit, and if there's any questions, be happy to take them.
I've met you a couple of times at the fly fishing. Really appreciate the videos you're doing. But just a little contradiction that's always I've always find hard to get my head around. When you say you've got your long dropper and it can cause interference with the other fly, but then when you check nymphing, you say you can impart some action on the fly. Are they not one and the same thing, or how do you? Specifically with imparting action, it's just something I've never quite understood, and in still water or running water as well. Yeah,
that's a great question, because ideally, even when we're European nymphing, we're trying to maintain, and most guys that are proficient with it have done it, you're trying to maintain a dead drift, but you're just in contact of that dead drift. So there's no difference when we're indicating nymphing. We're always trying to mimic that nymph coming down without I always imagine fishing that your flies like they're not attached to any line,
Yeah.
But the difference between that and drag and then animation is animation's deliberate movement of the flies, where drag is just poor. Like, I hate drag flies. And we say that when we're fishing European nymphing, or even indicate nymphing, if you can't fish your flies well, fish them poor. So animate, so move the flies.
Okay.
Yeah, so deliberately, and that's we generally move. It's hard to tell if you haven't done a lot of European nymphing or nymphing. It's soft, usually soft rising up and down, mimicking that rise and fall of mayflies. So it's just soft bouncing of that rod tip. It's not like soft plastic fishing or anything like that, but it's just drawing it up and bouncing, particularly through back eddies and things like that, where you just can't get good drifts in. So we'll deliberately chuck flies into those back eddies and fish them poorly. Drag them, you're not dragging them, but you're drawing, dropping them through the water column.
Yeah, sure. So the drag's just a completely different sort of sustained
We're avoiding drag, If we've got drag, sometimes if it's behind us, we'll just start swinging. I'll ask the client, start moving your rod. I want you to start dragging sideways, which is swinging then, moving it sideways. Because those caddis, if there's caddis around, that's the way they move. They move sideways through the current, where mayflies come up vertically. So that's the
No, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's sort of funny once you want the good movement, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, cheers.
No worries, Mitch.
I enjoyed your talk. Thanks, Scott. It was really good. You talked about buzzers in another talk. How does a buzzer go under a dry in a stream early season? Is that a go or?
Oh, no, that's you. How you going, Len, as well?
Yeah, good,
Well, that's a good question. I've seen people use buzzers on like slower moving waters, like flats, like slower moving flats and things like that. I personally always, especially we're talking about early river season, we're always looking to get those flies close to the bottom as possible, but not bottom bash. So, it's only people quite surprised they've got one pattern, but it's got so many different bead sizes on that pattern. And we want to get our flies close to the bottom. So buzzers will tend to hold up a little bit more high in the water, but certainly if they're rising or they're up in the water column, put the fly there. So that's fine. But I find a lighter nymph's probably the better option, a copper bead if they're up in the water column. But generally early season, we're trying to get those flies. It's fast, it's cold. All my nymphs are tied out of tungsten. I don't have they're all tungsten, but they're different size beads, from very light tungsten to really heavy.
Okay. If the fish are rather picky, would a buzzer be a go, do you think? Perhaps later in the season, or just for lakes?
Yeah. More buzzers we generally use on still waters, on lakes.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I've never tried it that much. And I remember I did a midge presentation at the fly fisher in Melbourne, and someone came up to me and showed me some fish in a New Zealand fish, and he just showed me all the chironomid pupa, and it was just, he did a stomach pump of one, and it was just full of midge pupa. So if they're on them, it will certainly work. But I find, rivers are flowing, the fish have got to make relatively quick decisions unless the water's slow. So just put that fly in front of the fish most of the time, and it will do the job.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that.
Good question, Lynn.
G'day, Scotty. Barney here.
Barney, how are you?
Good, mate. Good. Getting those nymphs down to the bottom and keeping them in the zone is pretty important.
Yeah.
How often do you put a bit of split shot on your line?
Yeah, that's another good one. When I'm bottom bashing, so if I'm fishing for spawning fish, I've used split shot, but not. I tend to stay away from it. I prefer to use different weighted beads of tungsten. So even if it means going to a 4 mil tungsten, 2 of them, which is a total of 8 mil, you should get there in time. But something like the Yukonbean River, where they're just held up hard on the bottom and you need to just scrape the bottom of the whole one. And it doesn't really matter about fly presentation, but I find that putting split shot on does affect your drift of your flies. It sort of, I don't know, it just anchors them, doesn't make them move as natural through the water. I don't know. I've tried it plenty. I've actually had a good crack on the Swampy with split shot, because I thought it works in the Yukonbean. I'll take it to the Swampy. It's big, it's 10 foot deep and fast flowing. But I found that the catch rate did not improve at all by getting it. And I really did feel like it was the flies were sort of not drifting naturally enough, That's what I mean. When we talk about European nymphing, we're not just talking about bottom bashing. We're always working to go as light as possible in our drifts, working towards. That's why we use single flies a lot. So if it's just a single 3 mil, it's a single 3 mil. If we need a 3 mil and a 2.8 on the top to get to where we need to get and drift naturally, that's where we want to be. So yeah, haven't fished split shot. I've tried it. I've probably tried it for a good 4 seasons or something, and I just didn't feel, like it was,
Well, you've given it a good crack, mate. Just that guides in New Zealand occasionally use it to get that thing down for the thing in very fast water in a deep hole off a short flow in and dropping into a deep hole, and those fish are just hanging behind that shallow drop off.
Yeah, and like I said, we do emphasise, do whatever it takes to get the fly in front of the fish.
Yep.
So
Okay,
if your 2 4 mils aren't getting there, then absolutely try split shot, because they're not going to take it if the flies are drifting a metre above its head.
Okay. Thanks, Scott.
No worries.
Hey, Scott. Firstly, thanks for your time, mate, in sharing your knowledge. You're incredibly generous. I've been lucky to sit in on a few of your presentations and have often picked your brains at the Fly Fisher as well, which I'm grateful for. Something in your prezzo that sparked my interest was fishing with sex dungeons. Can you give a bit more info on your setup, what you're using with those? Have you fished them in the Goulburn before? What type of water do you look for? I mean, it's a pretty exciting thing to potentially lure a fish out with one of those flies, just to say you've done it. Can you give any info on it?
You do get a cool pic with a sex dungeon hanging out of a fish's mouth. It looks pretty awesome. But yeah, I mean those articulated flies, which what they are. There's a lot of movement in those flies, but don't be afraid to use an 8-weight rod on the Goulburn if you really want to present them easy on a single-handed fly rod. They do go better on a double-handed fly rod, really easy to cast. And generally, like I said, we are hitting the far side of the bank. We're working where it's deep under willows, throwing in a mend, so letting it drop through the water and then letting it sweep across and moving it a little bit. Tend not to move it that much. You know, you don't have to engage your left hand too much and go left and right. And really, they've just got a lot of rubber legs. They seem to get eaten just on that swing. Yeah, browns particularly tend to like those larger flies, the bigger brown. So look at those. Tend not to fish. Try not to fish, even when this is just generally for swinging larger flies. Try not to fish those weird where you're standing in a back eddy, it's sort of back currenting to the left, and then you're casting across the right, and it's doing the same. When you cast out and you want it to swing, you're getting S shapes in your fly line.
Yes.
But you need that nice bow, so a nice U shape the whole way through your swing. Whenever I'm getting those weird S's and there's too many currents going left and right, you move to a spot where you get that nice sweep and that U shape in your line.
Yeah, okay. Awesome. And have you had luck on the Goulburn with the sex dungeon?
I haven't fished a lot on the Goulburn, but the swampy places like that, yeah. I don't fish the Goulburn enough. I should fish it like a lot more, but I usually go to the Goulburn for a nice hatch and things like that. So, but it's definitely swinging big flies is a lot of fun. And sometimes it's the go-to method, particularly if you go there to the Goulburn, it's coloured up. You know, a black coloured fly swung over lips and edges like that. When the fish will be feeding, they just got to see the fly. Like we said, this whole presentation is about putting the fly in front of the fish. And if it's a large fly, it doesn't matter whether it's a sex dungeon or a small bead-headed nymph, just put that fly in front of the fish and they'll have a go. They're naturally aggressive trout.
Awesome. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Dean.
Scott, I've got a question through on the chat.
Yes, sure.
So great presentation, mate. I'm trying to decide between a Euro rod and a trout spay. Fish the Goulburn, Kiwa, and Snowy, etc., or should I bite the bullet and buy both? I'm handy with the spay.
Yeah, well, they're two different rods for two different methods. So if you want to get into that European nymphing, you stick with the dedicated Euro nymphing rod, and it is hard. I mean, I worked in a fly shop, and I try to sell people stuff, but I always try to sell people stuff that they need for the job, and it's just like, I do have a lot of people come in and say, can't I just European nymph with my 5-weight 9-foot? Of course, you can do anything with anything if you like. You can take a Toyota Corolla around a racetrack if you want, you know what I mean? But is it going to be the right tool for the job? No, and once you understand the concepts of what you're fishing and why, it makes complete sense. And unfortunately, there's no all-round rod that will do it. So the trout spay, I guess it comes down to what you want out of that fishing, So, for European nymphing through competition angling, if you haven't done it, it's a very proficient way to catch fish and lots of numbers of fish. It's proven, but it's just like me. I love dry fly fishing and nymph under dry. So I always try and go for that because I just love that type of fishing. So I guess it's what you want out of your own fishing. But both those will work well in those rivers that he's asked. But yeah, it's one of the other. Yep, for sure.
Thanks, Scott. If you're looking at trout spay, I asked that first question. What are you looking at? Like 3, 4, 6, or does it depend on the water? Depend on the lines you're using? Because if you look at, there's a lot of new trout spays out with a 3 and 2 weight. Is that too light for like sex dungeon or something like that?
No, yeah, probably possibly for a big sex dungeon, but those ones for the rivers you're saying is okay, like the ovens and stuff like that. But that sex dungeon is not too hard to chuck. Like that's not too hard to chuck. Like I think the other day, the last season, I was probably chucking the 5-weight, but it was hard. It just makes life difficult. So,
yeah,
if you're looking at if you want to chuck big flies, you just have to go heavy. It doesn't matter about the water really. It matters about what you want to chuck. So if you do go, I want to chuck sex dungeons in the Goulburn, we'll then lean towards a 5 or something like that, 5 or 6. So,
right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No worries.
Sorry, Scott. Way off subject. Have you ever done saltwater fishing?
Have I done saltwater fly fishing?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah. We run trips to a place called Kiribati, Christmas Island. So, so I've done a lot of bonefish fishing for giant trevally, but one of my favourite things at the moment would be chasing bream on the fly at the moment. And we are setting up we're setting up a boat at the moment last year to target bream down Warrnambool. So it's pretty exciting. Yeah, for me personally, if I book a trip and I'm thinking overseas, I'm thinking saltwater. That's just where I'm my own personal issue.
Okay, well, yeah, I've done more salt water than fresh water, but anyway.
Yeah. The salt water, we're surrounded by salt water, and not enough people doing it. So we've got great bream fishing, estuary perch. You know, there's great flathead fishing in summertime around the flats around our bay. Sensation.
What sort of flies would you use for that? And
we'd have to do another discussion with the red tag guys about
no
salt
problem,
fishing
no
in Melbourne.
Thanks, Mark.
Just clousers and crazy charlies. Keep it simple. 2 flies, different patterns of those flies. Yeah.
No worries. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you.
There was also a comment from the, I think his name's Cody. I think he was the young lad who jumped in and asked about the, he was asking about the worms, but he put a comment up that he found the talk really helpful. I think he's still here. If you're Cody,
he actually asked it was a very good question, an interesting question as well, because he did notice that tail quite long, and there's the commercial ones that I do get from the fly fish. I do trim the tails off. Not because I'm worried at all about the fish not eating the hook part of the fly, but what I'm worried about, the longer the profile is of that fly, it takes a hell of a longer to get to the bottom.
True.
So it's really important that that tail isn't too long, because it does affect the way it gets to the bottom. And remember we said most of the fish are feeding on the bottom this time of year?
Yeah.
It does help to trim that tail a little bit, but I'm not worried about the fish eating it, because when they want to eat it, they'll eat the whole thing, right? And a bit of your line as well.
Yeah.
But thanks for that. Was a great question.
Yeah.
I've got one. A very controversial question.
I like these, Marshall. Yeah.
Have you ever tried your own nymphing using a very small 1-inch soft plastic nymph on one of your droppers?
I didn't. No way. We're fly fishing, mate. We don't use plastics.
Well, you're using a squirmy worm. What's the difference? The reason I ask is I've got friends in America who've been actually using those little 1-inch nymphs made in Tasmania, Euro nymphing, and they're having some pretty spectacular success in some of their rivers.
Yeah, no doubt. And it does, I guess that's why synthetics in fly fishing are very interesting. And I guess it's been the age-old debate ever since they come on with like Antron dubbing, you know, where synthetic dubbing, but we've all accepted a synthetic dubbing to be okay. But sometimes we think plastics and things like that, maybe, it's one of those, it's just debatable. It's just, you know, and I've always said, if you're having fun while doing it, doesn't matter. There's so many times that I've tied on the squirmy and I can just see the look on people's face like, now I'm not fly fishing. And then after, but there's no different. As soon as it hits the water, you're looking for drift lines, you're controlling. And when there's a bend in the rod and lots of bends in the rods, some people don't really care too much. But I take out people that will only fish dry fly. They say, I don't want to fish subsurface. So, and it's a great challenge for myself, you know. But it's like I said, as long as I don't care. That's up to the people that use it. But as long as you're having fun, I'm all for it. A good question as well, Marshall. Thanks.
Scott, thanks for your time there. It's very generous of you, all the information. I noticed on your nymph rig, you've got European nymph line, and yet we're only fishing it with the leader and tippet typically. And I'm just wondering if you change your mind halfway through and you want to fling it through a couple of dry flies. is it possible just to have a 2 or 3 weight line on your 10-foot rod, and then just put a regular leader on, and rather than having a Euro Nymph line on the whole way through?
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of Euro Nymph rods that are different actions, but the real specific good Euro Nymph rods are real specific. Like, so we're looking for a really soft tip rod when we're Euro Nymphing, one to cast, and then second to so it's got a soft bend. So when we catch fish, we protect our fine tippet. That's why Cam on that flyer that was sent out, Cam got that on a 2-weight rod, and it was 4-pound tippet, very light tippet. But I wasn't really worried about the line breaking at all, and that's why our rods, the soft tip of the rods, protect our tippet, which does when you start throwing weight forward fly lines through them, can affect it a little bit, but generally not. I don't do it a lot. I tend to carry, like, I'll carry a Euro Nymph rod with all the setup there in my backpack, and then I'll go with my 4-weight rod, weight forward fly line, and just swap it that way. But you can definitely, take your 3-weight reel and see how it runs. Have a cast with it in the backyard. And if it, like I said, I keep on saying, keep the game short. Like, you don't really need to cast that fast. So I'm sure most of the time you could, but at the same time, I'm telling you to buy more rods because I've worked in the retail section. So buy 3 nymphing rods and 4 dry fly rods. But yeah, you could certainly deliver dry flies with a nymphing rod.
Well, I've been enjoying some new purchases during lockdown. So
yeah, that's why I say support the retailers and guides, because we're broke.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Euro nymphing fly lines. I mean, there's again a lot of people now. In fact, a prominent author in America says fly line sucks, and he says that the best setup is to use mono or one of the 26-foot tapered leaders that come from hens or people like that, because they're far superior. And the second question is, Euro nymphing with the Tenkara rod.
Sorry, what was the second question again about the Tenkara?
Euro nymphing with the Tenkara rod.
Yep. Yeah, so that's a good question about we should almost do a separate one just about European nymphing. It is good to come. The setup that we run in our classes is the setup that the Australian team uses in the European nymphing.
Yeah, dictated by competition.
They are dictated by competition, yep. But generally, I agree with most of the things. It's not really, it doesn't matter all that much, but there's positives and negatives of using mono. Mono is terrible in your left hand, especially when we start to French nymph. So there's a difference. There's Czech nymph, and we run through this on our courses. There's Czech, there's Spanish, French. So French is when you're casting long and engaging your left hand. Czech is just, straight to the reel under the rod tip stuff. But having a European or a fly line, a nymphing fly line, so much easier to handle with your left hand than mono. If you've ever handled mono with your left hand, it twists. It's horrible. And remember, we're talking about keeping engaged to your flies. I find it, just really, really tough to be engaged with handling monofilament in your left hand. So when we're casting 30 foot, it's much easier done with a nymphing line in your hand.
You still do get some sag though, even with a Euro nymphing line.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it is thin diameter, as thin as they can go. But there's a balance between handling, and we talk about this positive, negative. Winds are a huge issue, especially coming up your bum with European nymphing in contact. There's times where indicator fishing is a better option. There's positives and negatives to both methods. So that's why we do like to use definitely like to use a fly line. And I've run the straight mono through, especially with spawning fish. Just straight through 30, 40 foot of straight mono, because I'm not really caring too much about sensation. They're pretty obvious. And the second question was Tenkara. Can you Euro nymph from a Tenkara? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Good question. I don't know. I've never Tenkara fished before, so I couldn't answer that question. I think Tenkara is Tenkara, and fly fishing is fly fishing. The two we do get asked a lot when I working at the fly shop. We probably get asked every 8 months, do we sell 10-car rods? And we always say, no, we're a fly shop. Oh, arrogant, rude. But yeah, so 10-car it'll be a perfect way to learn something similar to Euro nymphing, but European nymphing is, like I said, it's not about just fishing under your rod tip. It is sometimes a lot. If we're fishing the swampy, sometimes we're casting with the nymphing rod 40 feet,
Yeah, you can't do that with 10-car, but in terms of control, potentially you have the ultimate control just by raising the rod.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good practice as well, and I guess it's good for stealth and learning how to fish short as well.
Well, I'll tell you how it goes next year.
Good luck. Good luck. Thanks for the question.
Scott, I've got a couple more through on the chat.
Yep.
So the first one is wondering how often you fish unweighted nymphs, especially while dry dropper fishing. I always find myself relying on a beaded nymph to get the depth, but on the smaller water, I feel like it lacks presentation.
Yeah, that's what I said. I talked about earlier about bead size. So I always use tungsten in different bead size, but generally, if I'm fishing unweighted, I want to catch on the dry fly. So start using things like clink hammers, F flies, flies that hang into the water. If you're up in the surface with a nymph, you may as well have a post on it and catch it on a dry fly. So, but I have been running Mark Weigel, who we run the trips up to the Swampy Lodge, and I don't fish enough double dry rigs, tend to not. I find that same problem of when we talked about arguing flies. So if you don't land them in a straight line, if one kicks slightly 10 centimeters to the left, you find that that one takes off quicker and they side on, and all sorts of things is happening on the surface. But with Mark, we've been running a lot of really small dries. It's hard to see off the back, but having a lot of success with what are they called? I'm blank for the moment. I'll come back to you on that. But I've just blanked out. But we've pretty much small parachute flies off the back of larger. You know that Scott's High-Vis fly running small. You're better off running smaller dry 16s off the back, and had great success catching fish like that running 2 dries rather than running an unweighted nymph.
There's a couple of others now. In this early part of the season, so first 2-3 weeks, where the window for post-spawn fish is limited, what is the ideal water to fish? Is it small feeder streams or creeks, high mountain streams, or bigger rivers like the Stevenson, Rubicon, or Acheron?
Yeah, so if you're targeting large fish, we're always looking generally for a lake with feeder streams into lakes where fish will go up and spawn and come back. But the Stevenson is a spawning creek of the Goulburn River, so they do travel. They go Acheron, Stevenson. So just the Rubicon spawning stream of the Goulburn as well. So you can definitely have large fish in any of our small streams attached to larger rivers or lakes. So probably less in the high country and the smaller stuff, but they're resident fish. So if you catch them up there, put them back. But they're not going from a lake and back and forth. So less likely to catch them in high mountain streams.
And when nymphing in high waters, what's the best method to determine depths and sink rates?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you indicate nymph fishing, it's what we call the indicator gets nervous. So as you cast your indicator up, during your drift, you'll see it come back nice and even with the flow. When your nymphs hit the bottom, you'll start seeing that indicator shaking. And that's the flies on the bottom. Your flies are at where they should be. And you'll see your indicator start shaking. If you're casting up in your drift line and that's not happening, it means you need to go heavier or extend your tippet or put 2 flies on. That's what we talk about, because we want that nervous indicator all the way through the drift as long as we can. So it may take a meter or so to get in the drift and then start shaking. But what you don't want is casting up and it's nice and smooth. European nymphing goes through more feel, and you use that you use your leader to see, and you feel it through the rod as well.
Great, thank you. So,
good question, that one.
Any more for any more? It's almost 8:45. We had, I think we peaked at about 83 participants, which was great. As we said earlier, this is being recorded. We'll put it up on the Red Tag YouTube channel before we're out of lockdown, hopefully. So.